He didn't look like anybody's notion of somebody who would tear apart young girls.
My name is Ted Bundy. I've never spoken to anybody about this. I am looking for an opportunity to tell the story as best I can.
A person of this type chooses his victim for a reason. Possession, control, violence.
Something unique about Ted's brain. He talked in terms of a voice in his head, and this voice would start saying things about women.
He had very blue eyes. When he really got going, his eyes went absolutely black.
Murder, leaving a person of this type hungry, unfulfilled, would also leave him with the obviously irrational belief that the next time he did it, he would be fulfilled. And the next time he did it, he would be fulfilled. Or the next time he did it, he would be fulfilled.
Theodore Bundy has escaped, suspected of dozens of sex killings in Washington State, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado.
I think things are going to work out. That's about all I can say.
Bundy is acting as his own lawyer.
What is unusual to see is that many of the onlookers are women. Are you a little scared when you look at him?
He just doesn't look like the type to kill somebody.
Serial killer Theodore Bundy has escaped once again.
One of the FBI's most wanted men.
He was charming, good-looking, smart. Are you sure you have the right guy?
I'm not crazy. I'm on the split personality. I mean, I'm just a normal individual.
When Ted Bundy was 14 years old, his aunt woke up one morning to find him standing silently beside her bed. He had placed kitchen knives around her sleeping body while she slept. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. She later told a journalist that she was the only person in the family who thought that was strange. Nobody else did anything about it. That is where this story really begins. Not in 1974 when the first confirmed body was found. Not in 1978 when he walked into a sorority house in Florida. It begins in a household where a 14-year-old boy arranged knives around a sleeping woman, and the adults in the room decided it was not worth mentioning. Ted Bundy went on to confess to 30 murders across 7 states. Criminologists believe the real number is closer to 100. As recently as 2026, DNA testing confirmed he killed a 17-year-old girl in Utah in 1974, whose case had been unsolved for over 50 years. The file is still not fully closed. This is the full story. The childhood nobody wanted to see, the method that fooled an entire country, the 2 escapes that cost more lives, and the detail from his final hours that most people have never heard. Ted Bundy was born November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His mother was 22 and unmarried. To protect the family from the social stigma of an illegitimate child, his grandparents raised him as their own son. His mother became his sister. He grew up believing his grandmother was his mother, and the woman who had given birth to him was simply an older sibling living in the same house. He found out the truth as a teenager. He never spoke about how that felt. That silence was the first sign. His grandfather was a man described by neighbors as domineering and physically violent toward animals and people alike. Bundy later claimed they had a warm relationship. Psychiatrists who studied him noted that the insistence on this warm relationship, against all evidence, was itself a psychological signal. Children who idealize abusive parental figures frequently do so because the alternative, accepting that the person who raised them was dangerous, is psychologically unbearable. By his teenage years, Bundy was peeping through neighbors' windows at night. He stole. He manipulated people around him with a precision that his peers found charming and his few genuine observers found disturbing. Psychologist Al Carlisle, who assessed Bundy extensively, concluded that he was not born a psychopath. He created himself into one. Through pornography that escalated in violence over years. Through fantasies that became rehearsals. Through a growing need to control that had no outlet until it found one. By Christmas 1973, Carlisle later wrote, Bundy was a complete psychopath. The habits were fully formed. The fantasies had become plans. Within days, in January 1974, he attempted to kill a woman in her Seattle apartment. She survived. Her name has been kept from the public at her request. He tried again 3 weeks later. That time, the woman did not survive. He was 27 years old. He was enrolled in law school. He volunteered at a crisis hotline where he talked people out of suicide. He had a girlfriend who described him as warm, gentle, and devoted. He was all of those things. He was also something else entirely. And the two versions of him never interfered with each other. The arm sling, the fake cast, the dropped bag of groceries near the car door that would not quite open on its own. These details have been repeated so many times they have become almost theatrical. What they actually represented was something far more precise than a simple costume. Bundy had studied the specific psychology of his targets with the patience of someone who had been observing human behavior for years without participating in it. He knew that a young woman in suburban America in the 1970s carried a particular vulnerability. The socialized impulse to help someone who appeared to need assistance, especially someone who looked educated, clean-cut, and non-threatening. He did not look like danger. He looked like a man who needed 5 minutes of your time. His first confirmed victim was Linda Ann Healy, 21 years old, a psychology student and part-time radio announcer at the University of Washington in Seattle. On the night of February 1, 1974, Bundy broke into the basement bedroom of the house she shared with roommates. Her roommates found blood-stained sheets and an open window the next morning. No signs of struggle anywhere else in the house. He had been and gone before anyone knew to look. Over the next 5 months, at least 7 more women disappeared from Washington state. Most were students. Most were taken from places they considered completely safe. None of them left evidence connecting their disappearances to a single person. Because in 1974 there was no centralized system for connecting missing persons reports across different precincts, let alone across different states. When Bundy moved to Salt Lake City in the fall of 1974 to attend law school at the University of Utah, the disappearances moved with him. Women began vanishing in Utah, then in Colorado, then in Idaho. He was working across state lines, and the investigators in each state were working separate cases, sharing almost nothing with each other. His girlfriend, Liz Klupfer, noticed things. Meat cleaver kept in his desk drawer. Plaster of Paris in the basement. Crutches he claimed were for a friend. She asked him about each one. He smiled and explained every single thing away. She later wrote that his explanations were always so reasonable that questioning them felt like her own failure of trust rather than his failure of honesty. That specific dynamic, where the person being deceived comes to feel responsible for the deception, is one of the most documented characteristics of psychopathic manipulation. He did not convince her he was innocent. He made her feel guilty for suspecting him. She called the police with his name in 1974, then again in 1975. His name was logged as a tip both times. Detectives did not follow up aggressively because the profile they were building of the Pacific Northwest killer described someone disorganized, someone on the margins of society. Bundy was a law student. He did not match the profile. That gap between what investigators expected a serial killer to look like and what Bundy actually looked like cost lives. It also permanently changed how behavioral profiles are constructed in America. His case is in the curriculum of every serious criminal psychology program in the country because of exactly that failure. By 1975, Bundy had been arrested in Utah on a routine traffic stop that turned into a vehicle search, which turned into the discovery of burglary tools, which turned into a lineup identification by a woman named Carol Daranch, who had escaped an abduction attempt the previous year. She picked him out immediately. He was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 1 to 15 years. He was in prison and investigators across 3 states were now connecting the pattern. The evidence was building. The case looked like it was closing. Then he jumped out of a courthouse window. In June 1977, while representing himself in a murder hearing in Aspen, Colorado, Bundy was given access to the courthouse law library on the 2nd floor. During a recess, he opened a window and jumped. He spent 6 days in the mountains before being recaptured, exhausted and disoriented, having stolen food from a cabin and a car that broke down before he covered any meaningful distance. They put him in a more secure facility in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. He used the next 6 months to lose 35 pounds, systematically and deliberately, until he was thin enough to fit through the hole he had been cutting in the ceiling of his cell with a hacksaw blade he had somehow obtained. On the night of December 30, 1977, while most of the staff was home for the holidays, he crawled through the ceiling into the apartment of the chief jailer, directly above the cell block, put on street clothes he found there, and walked out the front door. It was 15 hours before anyone realized he was gone. He reached Tallahassee, Florida in January 1978. He rented a room near Florida State University under a false name. He had been free for less than 2 weeks when the control he had maintained for years finally broke entirely. On the night of January 14, 1978, he walked through an unlocked rear door of the Chi Omega sorority house on the FSU campus. He moved through the hallway in complete silence. Within 15 minutes, he had attacked 4 women. Margaret Bowman, 21 years old, was beaten with a piece of wood as she slept and strangled with a nylon stocking. Lisa Levy, also 21, was beaten unconscious and sexually assaulted. He bit her so hard on her left buttock that the teeth marks were still clearly visible when investigators photographed them hours later. He then attacked 2 more women in adjacent rooms before leaving the same way he came in. 3 weeks later, he abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her school grounds in Lake City, Florida, in the middle of the school day. A 12-year-old girl taken from a school with other children nearby. Her body was found weeks later near a state park. She was the youngest of his confirmed victims and the most reckless crime of his entire criminal history. He was caught on February 15, 1978, during a routine traffic stop in Pensacola, Florida. A police officer noticed a stolen Volkswagen Beetle driving slowly through the city in the early hours of the morning. When the officer moved to take him into custody, Bundy kicked his legs out from under him and ran. He was tackled, handcuffed, and arrested. The officer had no idea who was in the car. He found out when the fingerprints came back. The trial of Ted Bundy in 1979 was the first murder trial in American history broadcast on national television. What the country watched was something with no precedent. He represented himself. He cross-examined witnesses with genuine legal skill. He smiled at the gallery. He flirted with jurors. He delivered statements with the total confidence of a man who believed he could talk his way out of anything one final time. The courtroom was full of women who had attended every day of the trial. Some had styled their hair to match his victims. The bite mark on Lisa Levy's body was the evidence that closed the case. A forensic odontologist compared the wound to a dental impression taken from Bundy and testified to the match. His teeth were crooked and chipped in a distinctive pattern. The bite mark matched. He was convicted and sentenced to death. The judge who sentenced him looked across the courtroom and told him he would have made a fine lawyer. He wished him well. That exchange is on the official court record, in front of cameras, after a conviction for the murders of 2 women and the abduction and murder of a 12-year-old child. In the years between his conviction and his execution, Bundy granted interviews, cooperated with investigators, and slowly began releasing information about victims whose remains had never been found. Each new detail arrived timed to a death warrant being signed. He was trading the locations of dead women for more time alive. The families of missing girls were caught in the middle of that transaction. On January 23, 1989, one day before his execution, he sat down for a final interview and attributed his crimes entirely to pornography. Psychologists and criminologists have debated that claim for 35 years. Some see it as genuine insight. Most see it as one final performance, a narrative constructed for public consumption by a man who had been managing narratives his entire life. He was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison at 7:16 in the morning on January 24, 1989. Outside the prison, crowds had gathered through the night. Some held candles. Some held signs celebrating his death. A small number held signs mourning him. That last group is the detail nobody knows what to do with. As of 2026, DNA testing is still identifying his victims. A girl murdered in Utah in 1974 was only confirmed as his victim this year, more than 50 years after her death. The case file is not fully closed. What Ted Bundy left behind is not just a body count. He left behind a completely transformed system of criminal investigation. The behavioral profiling methodology, now used by law enforcement across the country, was built partly in response to what he exposed about the gaps that existed before him. Every serious violent crime investigation conducted in America after 1980 used tools that his crimes made necessary. He also left behind a question that 50 years of research has not fully answered. His aunt woke up one morning with knives arranged around her sleeping body and a 14-year-old boy watching her from the darkness. She was the only person in the room who thought that was strange. Nobody did anything. How many times does something like that happen before someone decides it is worth paying attention to? Subscribe to Cold Case Archives. Next episode, we go inside an apartment building in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where neighbors complained about the smell for months before anyone knocked on the door. Jeffrey Dahmer, the case that made investigators question everything they thought they knew about what human beings are capable of. The file is never really closed. It is only waiting to be reopened.